and welcome to the Darkside. I am one of your hosts, Tab of the Purple, and our co-host, TC Storm, will be joining us later. Today's show is going to be a short and lively discussion. We hope that you enjoy the discovery of it all, the journey towards knowledge, and that you participate and feel welcome here on the show. Today, we are talking about the topic, the backlash. It's something that's been on my mind for quite a few weeks, and then I found an article, so I wanted to go over that. But yeah, we are going to begin shortly. Here is the co-host. Hey, how you doing, Mr. Storm? Welcome.
What's up?
Good. So I was just doing the very quickest of intros to say what the topic was. But first and foremost, we are at the news stories. Are there any news stories this week that have caught your eye that you thought you'd want to mention today?
You know, I'm going to be real. There were some this week, and I just can't remember what they were at this moment in time.
Yeah, we've been a little bit tired recently, so I'm thinking the summer break is soon upon us, and we're looking forward to it. We have a couple more episodes before we take our annual summer leave, which we are looking forward to. So we're going to hit right into the subject today. I want to introduce the topic, so I'm just going to get my notes up to make sure I have everything. But as I said to you, partly this is born out of my frustration. So here in the Netherlands, we're gearing up for the 150th anniversary of the abolition of slavery in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is one of the last countries within Europe to pass laws in which slavery becomes illegal, and the holding of African slaves, particularly in chattel slavery, becomes illegal. And therefore, it's a momentous occasion. It's something that I think the whole country is gearing towards in some ways, and in some ways people are ignoring. It's definitely something that has a lot of conversation. Over this year alone, we've talked a lot about the different councils, gemeentes they're called in the Netherlands, the different branches of government that have apologized, the different Dutch organizations who've made steps towards moving forward to say, yes, these are issues. We've talked about the fact that there is a reparations budget sought. I mean, it's not fully reparations, but some sort of budget's being put forward to say, what can we do to actually begin to deal with this legacy that we have that hangs in the air. And yet still what we have is a situation where you can have the denial of events. And so while we're on the one hand gearing up for this really special occasion, which is going to be commemorated across the whole country over the weekend, that includes the 1st of July, which is a Suriname Freedom Day. And so it's there, the origins begin with Suriname, but it's spread throughout the whole Caribbean. And so there are events on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, etc. We're also seeing that there is backlash, there is exhaustion, there is, do we have to talk about this? There are people in denial. When you talk about events, people quantify it with, can everyone be included? Is it possible to start talking about child slavery in the modern era? And all of these other things begin to crop up. And so this week, as I was leaning into this issue, this feeling, this observation, that I'm tired of everyone ignoring the issue and then pretending as if, well, we talk about it all the time, so therefore why are you still talking about it, when every single time it comes on the table people find an excuse not to. I found this really interesting case study. Now this is it's a longer read. It is from the Guardian, and it is by Samira Shackle. It was released this week, so if you want to look it up. And the research is called, or the piece is called, The Backlash, How Slavery Research Came Under Fire. And this is it's an interesting piece because it's about Cambridge University and how they commissioned a piece of investigation to see how their university had links and roots financially into slavery. And they commissioned this in 2019, so before the pandemic, before the explosion, before the crisis that came to a head with Black Lives Matter and the whole movement within the summer of 2020, with the death of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Before all of that, they had commissioned this a year or two before to have some researchers on staff, and literally the research was looking through the financial documents to figure out how did Cambridge, a university, one of the premier universities in the UK and around the world, in fact, one that's held up as an institution of higher learning, as a standard beacon institution, how did they benefit from, and how, in which ways have they financially benefited from slavery? And so the researcher that undertook this is called Nicholas Bell Ramiro, and he and his team began to undertake this this process of it's fine work, right? You have to go in, sit in archives, go through the books, look at the names of the organizations, companies, and individuals who are given money, where that money has come from. It's tedious, it's time consuming, and in some ways it's just very meticulous work. It's literally just tracing the money. Where does it come from? Who is the person or the organization? How did they get their money? And then, what was their primary source of funding? And of course, in this period where the university is one of the eldest universities, and it's established in a period such as and benefits from the period of the empire and the colonialization period, which is based on the back of slavery. Of course, the money is very easily traced. There are logs. It's possible to see how quickly that happens. Now, the challenge is that as these university professors and researchers and historians are sifting through this information, there is, for some reason, there is this awful backlash, and university professors, not from the history department, it should be known, I guess, but some university professors begin to set about to sabotage their work, to ensure that there are misinformation divulged about the work, undermine the characters of the people involved, do all sorts of malicious, just really awful things in order to say that this research is not valid and should not be undertook. And when you ask yourself why, I think that's where it gets really frustrating, because by all accounts, when this hits the mainstream newspapers and it goes into the Independent in the UK, when it hits the mainstream newspapers, it's sold as being part of a woke agenda, whatever that means. It's sold as being a manipulation of information, a blackwashing, if you want, of historical information, when literally what the researchers are doing is sitting down and meticulously just going through the donations, going through the financial records of the university and tracing who is this donor, what kind of business did they had? Slaves? Okay, this is where the money comes from. Who is this donor? What kind of, and you can see it. And yes, Cambridge University is not in some of the hubs that we think of in the UK that have benefited from the slave trade. But the point that the historians are making is that is how much a part of empire it was. In order to facilitate the growth of the British Empire, it was off the back of, it was in conjunction with, it was complicit. But these so-called academics, these people who so-called work in these institutions, set about to sabotage the work because they believe that you should only tell the version of history that completely eradicates the suffering of the rest of the world. That's the long and short of it. You shouldn't say anything against the crown, the Brits, the people who are now rich and wealthy. And, the institution of Cambridge should never come into question, because what would that mean? How dare they? How dare they what exactly? And so for me, it was really a story that hit a nerve, because it's something that we get often as the dark side. It's something that I get often as a pastor. Why are you talking about this? I get accused, attacked, belittled, told that it's too much, that I'm playing to an agenda, that, you know, Black people, what else do you want? Haven't you got enough? And the simple fact of the matter is that people don't even engage in the subject before they're telling you it's over. They haven't even dealt, nobody knows how deep those roots, before that academic piece of research is being undertook, it was buried in an archive somewhere, and no one knew how deep the pockets of the university went as its relationship to the slave trade went. We didn't know. It's a brand new piece of research, but yet still you want to tell us that it's already over before we've even found out what the conclusion was. And I think that was the frustration of the team, of course, but it is definitely a frustration that I feel and I identify with other anti-racism educators, with people who do this kind of work, people who talk up in their circles, is that you get this sense that if you even mention that we have a society in which anti-Blackness exists, people act as if you are the worst human for raising such an issue. And how dare you make them feel in any way uncomfortable because we didn't do it. I didn't do it. I wasn't complicit, so it couldn't have been me. Why are you trying to make me feel like it was me? And the question has to be asked, like, why are you so against telling a fair representation of history? Why are you so against hearing what ancestors did if ancestors aren't relevant? If you're so like, we are over listening to you talk about slavery. Slavery happened so long ago. Why are you bothering to tell us? Then what's the big deal about us unrooting the fact that Cambridge University has ties to slavery? Like, what's the big deal that the historians went and did that? Because surely that was so long ago and it doesn't matter to anyone now. And what difference does it make? Unless the double standard is true, right? Unless there really is a double standard here, there really is this rudeness that happens where people think that they can just really just use Black and brown bodies as beating grounds and have no regard for the fact that these people have feelings. So that's why we're doing the subject, the backlash. This was my introduction to it, which was rather long. But this was the main story that was looked at, where the program, where the university had invested. And to their credit, this was pre-pandemic, the awful situation with why Black Lives Matter came to the forefront again and really exploded off of in 2020 with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. You know, it's pre all of that, and they were already doing this research, to be commended. But the organization themselves, even though they undertook this research, it felt like they didn't back the research because they allowed half their staff to act the fool, like really allowed them to attack, belittle, diminish the work of all of the people who took part in that, in those things. And then when it hit mass media, when it hits the kind of media, it goes into overdrive of this, well, there are spelling mistakes, so it can't be a good thing. There are, you know, nitpicking little things, anything they can find to belittle something. And in some cases, when the reports are made in the Independent, there are out and out lies within the reporting because none of that's within the case. And I think it's just heartbreaking that we're continuously on this treadmill of trying to have an honest conversation, of trying to say we don't want to be party to a system built on lies, of trying to say I want to unpack how deep does this go, where is a safe space, and the reality is there isn't any. There is no safe space in which we're allowed to deal with this issue, and that's why I wanted to bring it up today. So Mr. Storm, I know he's been patiently waiting for me to finish my my little soapbox moment. What's your feelings on the subject of the backlash?
I think this is the problem with what the university did. I think it was the right thing to do, but the problem with it is you always get down to who is the real criminal whenever you follow the money. And I think there's a lot of skeletons that are being buried. one of the things that the report highlighted is actually a very common practice that takes place today. And that was that I think it was Cambridge. Cambridge University was giving money to anti abolitionists whilst investing and bringing in more money from the slave trade than they were giving to abolition. Okay. So what it was, hey, we'll distract you by giving money to the abolitionists, but actually, what we're going to continue to do is to rake in money um, on the backs of slave trade and on the backs of injustice.
Yeah.
It's not too dissimilar to what corporation that sponsored Colin Kaepernick did in regards to Black Lives Matter and his stance. So they retained him secretly, though, whilst he was let go by a lot of other sponsors for taking the knee in protest of police injustice and brutality, particularly against Black people. So it came out now that, hey, we've been paying him his money all this time, and now let's have a big advertisement campaign regarding this. So we're happy to say this injustice is wrong, whilst all the while we're going to employ, child labor and we'll have our sweatshops over in Asia. So it's that, hey, we'll distract you with this positive message, and we're going to do everything else that's wrong. So I think that's one of the factors to bear in mind. But as I said, it's always a problem for those in power whenever you follow the money.
Well,
So
I mean, it's not only when you follow the money, though, is it? I mean, it is when you follow the money, but this is a great case because I think on the one hand, Cambridge made a really great step forward. And we have to acknowledge that, right? Before it was fashionable or popular or whatever you want to call it, what people are saying now, to invest in uncovering these links, they made that stride to saying, well, we're going to invest in some historians and employ them to do this work so that we can see for ourselves what the organization is saying. Because a lot of organizations that had this problem came, post 2020. We can argue the timing of it, but well done, pat yourself on the back. But when it comes down to it, it's the same old, right? Like, it's a great case of we're doing the right thing by investing in this historian and their team, employing PhD, professors to go in, uncover the archives, but we're refusing access to the campuses, but we're allowing individual professors to slander their character with no consequence. And so are you really giving them a chance? And it makes me sad that it's just the same old. Like, you can't, is if you follow the money, but even the people didn't even say anything. They hadn't even got the piece of research finished before their names were slandered just for asking the questions. You're getting into those problems.
Of course. But this is why I say it's about following the money, because you now have to ask yourself who donated. Right? And we live in a time where image is everything. Okay. So when you look at who donated to these institutions, and you also look at who benefited, the British institutions that benefited from slavery, okay, you then say to yourself, well, what's people's reactions going to be to these institutions? And you're now talking about levels of damage, or you'll be talking about families that have gotten wealthy off the back of slavery and have diversified and invested into other areas. What's the impact going to be on their businesses now? So when we're talking about institutions within the UK um, that have benefited from slavery or who were actually founded on slavery, you're starting off with the Bank of England,
Yeah.
right? Now, you're talking about the institution that pretty much runs the British economy.
Mm.
So if the institution that runs the British economy was founded on the back of slavery, you then make the very logical leap that the foundations of the modern British economy is on slavery.
Mm.
Okay, I know they like to tell this idea that it was the Industrial Revolution, but no, it predates the Industrial Revolution. You'd be looking at things like the Royal Mail. You'd be looking at people like David Cameron, ex-British Prime Minister. You know,
But
so you start delving
yeah.
into the lives of those who are at the top of politics, those who hold wealth,
Mm.
not rich, but wealth,
Mm.
right? And then that becomes a very different story, a very, very different story because they don't want these things out there. You start looking into how these people's family accumulated their wealth, people will start to boycott their businesses. And one of the things that, particularly in the US, is being recognized is the strength of the black dollar.
Mm.
And a recent example of this is with The Little Mermaid that was just released, right? Got pilloried by people before it even came out because it had a black lead actress in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so people thought it would tank. It's the number one movie in the US, and that is predominantly on the strength of the black dollar. So now you start black people now boycotting white businesses. Well, that's cutting into their bottom line, and you can't allow that.
The sad thing is, this I hear what you're saying, but here's the sad thing for me, right? I hear the point that you're making about the strength of the black dollar, pound, etc. And of course, we know that as world majority peoples, we actually hold a lot more power and influence than we are given credit for, right? It's our music, it's it's down to music, influence in media, influence in fashion, etc., etc., etc. So you see it all around you, but the credit is not given to where it comes from. And these are long-running debates and discussions about how influential black and brown communities are on world trends, financial industries, etc., etc. And of course, The Little Mermaid is a brilliant example because not only was the backlash swift and fire before it happened, but actually when the Little Mermaid was released, there were boycotts. There were the Rotten Tomatoes or whatever the website is where they review them. We're getting bombarded with reviews that were tanking the film, etc., etc., etc. And it said that the highest percentage of ethnicity that was going to see the movie that put it at number one is, of course, the black family. And so you then see very statistically, just is what it is, that black people are influential when they support something, and we support our own. The myth is that we don't support our own. The truth is that we do. We very much do come out and support those things that are from us, but that myth is perpetuated because it's there to break down the community and to hold us back. But what really bothers me about the discussion is, when it comes to things like the research and trying to uncover and understand how these institutions became as big as they did and on whose back that happened, you're not even at the level at which this conversation has any consequence. I would rather know straight out that my ancestors were part of the reason why this company is as great as it is. because it has that much resources, because you stole from my ancestors. You never paid them, you abused them, you disavowed them, and you knew. I think that what people fear is this idea of that we're going to suddenly boycott everything in the world, when what they don't realize is what we want more than anything is the truth. What I want more than anything is to know what you did. What I want more than anything is the recognition that what you did is wrong. That's it. That's what they're putting out there is, well, what happens when you find out? Are you going to boycott our organization? Are you going to ask for reparations? Are you going to if you could just tell the truth, if you would just say what it is, I mean, that goes an incredibly long way to making the strides that we need to go forward in understanding why our society is as broken down as it is, why it's so dependent upon a system that is based in this capitalistic white supremacist ideas. If you would just tell the truth. But the fact that you won't tell the truth is what leads to boycotts, is what leads to all of those things, because you're not being honest, you're not being truthful, you're not actually allowing us to really understand to the extent at which you stole from the people, not only their bodies, but their resources, but their land, but everything. We don't know.
But if you told the truth, the system would break. There's no way that you can have these institutions tell the truth and the system not break. And that can never be allowed, because the reality is slavery never stopped. There's more people being trafficked into the slave trade today than there ever has been at any point in history. So, if we tell the truth, we need to face up and acknowledge these things. And where are these people being trafficked to? Which countries? Right? Which nations are they being trafficked to? Right? They're not being trafficked. The majority aren't going into black and brown countries. They're being trafficked out of black and brown countries into countries that are not black and brown. So you can't afford to tell the truth, because if you tell the truth, then you have to do something about the present. And if you do something about the present, a lot of these companies will end up losing a lot of money, if not all. That's the reality of it. And I think you mentioned a word there when you were talking, the word influence. And I think this is the next point that I want to raise. The educational institutions commissioned a report, or commissioned someone to do a report. A few of them commissioned different people to do reports into their historical links with slavery. And this was pilloried by the media.
Mm-hmm.
It was attacked as being a woke agenda. Now, firstly, the term woke being co-opted into a pejorative by the right wing, I think is problematic. And the willingness and the eagerness of media organizations to go along with this use, to support this use, and to encourage and enable the usurpation of the term woke to become a pejorative is problematic. But it shows you the mindset and the ethos of these organizations. So when we talk about influence and how they labeled these investigations and reports as woke before they were released or upon their release, and how they pick them apart, you have to start looking at who owns the media, who invests in the media. And we're going back once again to following the money.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about nobility, aristocracy, all of these people at the top echelons of society.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now the question becomes, why would they want to push out this narrative? And it's not just about money and power. I think it's an acknowledgement of the influence that educational institutions can have on shaping society. And if you allow the educational institutions to then start doing these reports and commissioning these reports and beginning to tell the truth, it's not going to be an overnight shifting and changing of societal ideas, but it's one that will happen over decades. Now, if they are allowed to tell the truth, once again, you end up breaking the system. Not today, not tomorrow, but somewhere down the line, you end up breaking the system. And that cannot be allowed. So you now need to weaponize or to bring into play your ability to control the narrative, right? So we'll take the Daily Mail. Now, the Daily Mail is a newspaper that's right wing and has massive influence in the UK. And they pilloried these reports, right? Now, what you have to understand is that the Daily Mail is pretty much run by the Rothmers, right? By Viscount Rothmer. Okay. Now, this peerage, the Viscount of Rothmer peerage, was created in 1919 for someone called Harold Harmsworth, right? And since then, every holder of the title Rothmer, Baron of Rothmer, or Viscount Rothmer, has served as the chairman of the Daily Mail and General Trust.
Okay.
Now, what you have to understand about Viscount Rothmer, the very first one, and it will help you understand
what happens next.
What happens next and the editorial leanings, is that he was very much in support of the Nazis. Right? So he was advocating for peaceful relations between the UK and Germany. And he was already influential in the media. His title was created because of his influence within the media, and he was able to get to the top echelons of British society. But he was openly supportive of fascism and his praise for Nazis, right? And so that was part of what drove the editorial positions of his newspaper then and moving forward. Right? So when you have now these reports being commissioned, and you have the use of the word woke as a pejorative, and you have all of these things, you have to understand this is being done within a media organization that has right-wing, and I mean far right-wing leanings and ideologies. It was established on these ideologies. And there has been one family controlling it ever since then. So
go on.
The idea that the political leanings are going to shift that much are slim to none.
It's so frustrating because, you know, particularly as a Christian, but I think as a human being, the truth becomes very important to us. You know, if you don't, we talk often, if you don't know your history, if you don't know your identity, if you don't know where you're coming from, then you will find it really difficult to process the world around you. You know, the ideas that become very common to other people can feel very foreign. And I know that for myself, as a person who's been cut off from their historical legacy, who lived in an isolated way. There are things about the world around me that I had to really struggle to learn because I didn't know how things worked, how, you know, you weren't aware of, you know, some of these nuances within society. And the fact that that European countries or that engaged in colonialization and their offspring, if I put it like that, refuse to really unpack the legacy of what they have done, refuse to reveal the truth behind what it is, and denigrate anyone for daring to speak on the subject is really frustrating. And the fact that people, and what hurts me particularly in the field that I work in, is that people within the faith, in, you know, the faith community, buy into all of this lock, stock, and two smoking barrels, right? They don't even question the fact that, why do I have these beliefs that are so anti-human? Why is it if somebody talks about race, racism, slavery, the historical legacies of that, I get so angry. But give me 5 minutes to talk about the Second World War, and I'm right there with you. Give me a few minutes to talk about, you know, I don't know, whatever, the Gulf, or whatever historical information, and I'm right there. Give me time to talk about the EU and how it developed. I'm willing to have that conversation. I will talk all day long about the war in Russia and Ukraine, not knowing really any facts about those people, not really understanding. But in your own country, let's talk about how your institutions came into being. Let's actually uncover those facts and information, and you're going to denigrate anyone who dares to speak on it. It's a source of frustration. Yeah, that's all I can say. Go on, because I know you have more points to make, and I don't want to.
No, I was just going to respond to what you're saying and say, look, the idea that people tend to have any intellectual integrity is not true to most people. We all experience cognitive dissonance on many points, because we all struggle to hear the truth sometimes. When it comes to people with right-wing tendencies who espouse views on history, you are never going to get a nuanced perspective, and you are never going to get an honest perspective, because their views are very much steeped in white supremacy, and they cannot let go of their concepts of power. So, for example, when we're talking about these reports that were commissioned, you're talking about at the height of Black Lives Matter, after the death of George Floyd, and there were other movements, and people were pulling down statues, and people were getting upset and saying, "Well, you can't pull down our statues; these are our history." Right? They're ignoring the fact that a lot of these statues were erected less than a century ago. Okay. But also they're ignoring the fact that they have no respect for the history of any culture outside of that is white. And I'll give you an example. Those that advocate for preserving history are not upset at the destruction done to what we now call Mount Rushmore, because the Native Americans knew it as the Five Fathers, right? And in order to desecrate the history and landmark of the Native Americans, they carved the faces of these presidents into them, right? But these same people that are talking about history aren't upset that this was done to the history of Native Americans.
And that's
right?
shocking, right?
So you can't talk about the preservation of history. That's not your concern. Your concern is the preservation of a specific story and narrative.
And maybe, just maybe, that's for people like you and I, for people who are working on the front lines, right? So, my life is not on the line every day working in this area, but there are those that work on the front lines of this type of research, or in fields in which they have to literally get between police and people of color to save their lives, etc., etc. For those of us who are even a little bit in this world and we're talking about this subject of anti-racism, and we're trying to educate people, or we're trying to make the world a better place, I guess the truth is, and this is a difficult truth to swallow, and most people don't care, don't want to know, don't want their world changed. They're content to be within a system that seemingly protects them, even if it comes at the expense of others. And I think it's really exhausting. And if I say it on the other side, for those people who look at people like you and I, or look at the really famous ones and the ones who are doing this work and writing books and doing all of those things, and they think, oh well, they're popular and they're getting all of this attention and things are going well for them, and whatever. The reality is far more difficult. The reality is that oftentimes you're a pariah, oftentimes you're ostracized, oftentimes you're professionally maligned, you're alienated, you are belittled, you are spoken down to. If you want to find a field of people who have endured constant criticism, attack, sometimes physical threat of life, etc., 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 speak to anyone who works within anti-racism work. Speak to anyone who works trying to do history of Black people, of the restoration of human life, who works within those fields, and you'll find people who are completely alienated from the world, and it's to me, it's just heartbreaking.
Right. So I'm just looking at my notes here, and I want to come back to something I was speaking about earlier, actually, because you drifted off. But I was speaking about influence and universities.
Yes.
Now, before Cambridge started their process, the University of Glasgow did. And after their findings, they said, look, we need to make some form of reparation. So they set up a center for, was it Black Cultural Studies or something like that? And they did something else, right? That's in the UK. You have in the US, Harvard, Cambridge, Yale, these other institutions have gone through similar processes and said, we need to make some form of reparation. So they set up scholarship funds for descendants of people who they could find they did own slaves and they owned their ancestors and different things like that. Okay. Now, when I was saying about changing the face of society, what you have to understand is these people are fully aware of the power of these institutions to change the shape of society, because out of these institutions come the majority of politicians. Right? You're looking at Cambridge, Oxford, Yale, Harvard, all of these things within the US and UK. These are where, and Eton in the UK is another one, actually, where the majority of the politicians will come from. Now, these people are going to shape educational policies. Okay. These people are going to shape governmental policies and laws. Now, the moment that you start having the universities take an honest look, they then don't have a choice but to be honest in their classes and campuses about history. Okay. Once you do that, the shape of the student body begins to change and the mindset of the student body begins to change, which means that the views of your politicians now are likely to change. And if that changes, what then happens to the calls for reparations, especially when the educational institutions that they attended have already said we need to make reparations. What are the leanings and tendencies of the politicians moving forward then? Are they going to say on a national level we should make reparations? Well, if they make reparations on a national level, you best believe people are going to come after companies on an individual level. So you cannot afford for these institutions to be able to look at and to find in favor of a true telling of their involvement in the slave trade in history, because what we have seen is that when they do so and they're honest about it, they then start using the R word. We need to make reparations. We need to make amends. We need to do something. And then that starts setting the example. Now, do I believe these institutions have gone far enough? No. But it's a start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once you start that shift, it's going to be hard to stop. Once it reaches critical mass, it's just going to go. So they're going to do all they can to stop or to delay any advancement in this. And that's why it doesn't matter which educational institution has done it. This is why you have seen such a backlash. Because, as I said, once one starts, the others are going to do it. They're going to say, well, we need to start looking. And that's just the way that academia works. Somebody asks a question. Somebody goes, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let me see, what can I build upon this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great field of work. That's why I believe in education. Just keep learning, keep building, keep growing.
Right. So, and that's my point. So Glasgow starts, and then you have Cambridge, and then you've had one or two others, and it's just going to start going and going and going and going. So they're going to do all they can to slow it down.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, and I just had a quick look to remind myself, because as you were saying and listing the universities there, I was like, yeah, because our the current Prime Minister of the UK, for example, has not only been educated in the UK at Oxford and one of the Oxford universities, but he's also been educated in the US at Stanford. And so you're talking about then having that, if those institutions had given a good look at where they had begun, had given a good look, what difference would that make to the campus environment in which, you know, the current Prime Minister and other prime ministers, etc., politicians actually develop ideas, and how do those ideas shape and change? And, you know, if they're and this is one for myself as I did business in my original degree. You know, as a student of business, there are some fundamentals that we're taught that are actually based on a principle of a lie, right? And so when you're looking at economics, when you're looking at statistics and business and business models, etc., they're based on the idea that the model itself, the very premise of the economy that you're looking at, was free of this type of corruption in some ways, and that it can sustain itself without this kind of evil. And the truth is, if you don't acknowledge the fact that it got to this level because of free labor, because of stolen land and etc., and all of those things, if you don't acknowledge that, then you're already starting at a poor starting point for your understanding of how the economy develops. But because, you know, it's definitely within an undergraduate business degree, your starting point is successful country, and then this is how business is done, from the perspective of, well, of course, you're not acknowledging that the starting point is faulty, because the starting point is not free of all of these things. It's, in actual fact, you're starting at a point in history where you've missed out, well, you know, but we stole people, land, resources, jewels, from everyone else. And if you acknowledge that, then maybe you would run business differently. Maybe you would run the organizations differently. Maybe you would come out and do business differently if you actually knew that the starting point of what you are studying is vastly different than what they're putting forward. It's like the Maslow's hierarchy. It's a really popular human resource technique. So you're taught at universities as a standard. It's Maslow's law, and there's a hierarchy of needs. There's 5 levels, and these are what the levels are. Post-university now, many years later, you come to find out that this is not just standard. This isn't just he came up with an idea and look how wonderful it is and this is how everyone feels. This is actually steeped in, borrowed from, stolen off of ideas based within the native peoples. And these are things that he took from them, manipulated, and made them into a successful business model. Well, hang on, I wasn't taught that at university. I was just taught this is Maslow's law. Congratulations, you've learned it. Well done. These are the 5 levels. How will this affect people? And then go from there. The thing exists, go from there. But you're not taught how these things came into being, or how people learned about these things, or where they come from, or who they stole them from. So the very premise that you're learning from is wrong. And the fact that you just accept yeah. So as you say, I think it is a well-made point that if universities are honest, truthful, expanding, uncovering, changing their curriculum, not starting at 40 points in history, not starting with these shady things, it will shape and change their students in a very different way, because their students will not come out with the understanding that it's just a given. It's just a fact that, whichever person made this thing or claims this idea is the idea. And I think, yeah, I agree. But I give you those examples from a business perspective because I know them quite easily and can say them because I learned them over the last decades. It's like, went to university a long time ago, learned these things as just the standard model. Then you come out into the world and people are like, oh no, but did you know the indigenous peoples have this idea of the laws and rules? And I was like, sorry, they did what now? Oh, and he interacted with them, stole it and took it back, but then manipulated it so it could fit capitalism. I'm sorry, what now? Excuse me? I didn't learn that at university. Give me that again, and these things, they do shape you and they do influence, because how many times have I talked about, basic needs being met before you go on and do this, this, and this, and you think, no, that's not what it is. There's a lie being told that's being perpetuated, and you make everyone complicit in the lie. Frustratingly. Anyway, I know you have other points.
No, I'm done.
Yes. Well, I think on this one it's probably best, or it's best said that for myself, in the last few months, I've particularly this year come into contact with people who have belittled my beliefs, belittled my views, belittled my knowledge, research. They have denigrated the information I know. They have acted as if I am just a silly little girl off on her own little tangent. And while I obviously just continue on and ignore those people, it does take its toll when you realize that there is a concerted effort across all walks of life to deal with this. And within my field, within the religious centers, practices, within Christianity particularly, it fills me with anger. And sometimes I will confess rage that within Christianity lives, breathes this anti-human sentiment, this anti-Black sentiment, anti everybody else that's not white cis het, right? It's like, if you are not white normative there and you begin to speak about these issues of justice, you are isolated, denigrated, put down. And I do feel that we have a responsibility not only to speak out, but to educate those around us on the truth. If you are a Christian, if you are following Jesus of Nazareth, do you know where Nazareth is? Do you understand where that sits in the world? and where you sit in the world and how far removed you are from the culture, color, life, practice, language of the religion you follow. And how dare you have the audacity to manipulate and take a Hebrew religion and bash people over the head with it and make people feel like being who God created them to be is not enough. Like, no,
Well,
just vexing. The whole thing is just vexing.
I think one of the other points to make, and actually what you're talking about in religion is very appropriate or apt to this, is that one of the arguments given against these reports is that we are trying to judge historical actions by today's morality. Well, when we talk about Jesus and dying on the cross, we are also trying to judge historical actions through a modern morality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is that acceptable when it comes to talking about your religious beliefs? But when we start to talk about historical aspects outside of your religion, that's somehow not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes back to what I was saying about intellectual integrity. Don't
Mm.
expect it from white supremacists or right wing people.
No, that's very sad. Well, it is what it is. And only Jesus changes the hearts and minds of people. But here we like to discover, develop new ideas, like to discover and develop ourselves as people, so that we are more aware of issues, but more aware of how we engage in the world around us, how we engage with other people, how we love our neighbor, how we honor the Creator God in loving people who are like us or who are different from us, and helping you to understand the viewer, and those who interact with the show, that the world isn't as black and white as we like to think it is. There are some other things happening. Shall I say it like that? Yeah. I guess I'm a little frustrated this week, but I hope that's a really good one. I hope you really understood that. If you are looking for a series of articles on this, which has some really great books, you can look at The Guardian. They're doing a whole series at the moment of articles on this year, reflecting on anti-racism, reflecting on how far we've come or not, as the case may be, and looking at unpacking that. There's another one, this was from last year though, from the author of Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. There's a great article there as well. So there's a number of articles out there, and you can look at any newspaper, of course. I just happen to have this particular one on my phone at the moment. There are many others out there, but I would say, the articles I'm at least reading, I can advocate here because I can see the balanced view that the authors are having. They are saying their sources, that you can go verify it for yourselves. They're using books cited that you can go and read for yourself. They've got great resource lists that you can then go off and do proper investigations, not your own research off on a tangent down the rabbit hole of the crazy internet, but proper research to see, well, what is actually happening. And a book that maybe on this topic would help is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And I have it here somewhere. Can I see it? Ah, no, we need to talk about race. Is that one? I can't put my hand on it. It's right behind me somewhere. But that's a good book on this particular subject of why people are frustrated, why you may find that anti-racism educators, etc., are refusing to engage with some kinds of people, as TC Storm has said. When it comes to right-wing extremists, there is just no point. If the only version of history you want to tell is one in which the white victor goes around, does good deeds, and then comes back, that there's no convincing you that the truth is the truth, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway.
Well, that's us for this show today. Thank you, Mr. Storm. As always, a pleasure. I know you allow me to vent sometimes when I have these little rants about these particular subjects that upset me. So thank you very much for indulging me today. Thank you to the viewers that watch. We appreciate having you here on the dark side. Peace out. It's your turn. Bye. See you next week on the dark side. Then we will have a couple more episodes before we break for our summer break. Woohoo! Summertime. Peace.